Jag vet inte. Nej. Nej, det är inte Gustav. Nej, nu gör hon det.
Okej, då kan jag prata. Vi ser på ett. Det är ja. Han är det bara det stora, det är bara en person. Så det är det många som har precis. Ja, men det är det.
I need to do one night start. I think where's Is it? Oh, okay.
Hi, Tatiana. Nice to meet you. Hi. Nice to meet you. I'm Tatiana. And
So please.
yeah, I uploaded it in this break. So.
So we know where to find it.
Yeah, it's within this.
Yeah.
Once again. Make sure maybe
Jeez.
on the desktop it's oh you I can also put it inside the F1 presentation.
So let's.
This is Tatiana, this is my name on the desktop.
Let's.
I tried it out, it should work. And then if I share it in Zoom, I should also be able to use the presenter mode, right?
Yeah. Because
We can try.
when you share it,
Okay.
should be.
Will I do that or will somebody?
You just have to press F5. Now it's open. You just press F5 and the project start.
Okay.
That's it. Okay.
Great. Cool. And if it doesn't work, I just call you. Okay. Thank you.
There's. Could you upload it into computer? I guess. I don't know. Should be. Yeah, yes, it is correct. Okay, so I think we can start our session. I guess it's being recorded, so we can proceed. It's the presentations in this session will be dedicated to data literacy, as you may know, and we have 4 presentations, hopefully, because one virtual may not happen. I'm not sure if Roxanne makes to this this session. There was some technical problem that she encountered, and I'm not sure if she will be here. We then invite her to present her presentation. Otherwise, we will have 3 presentations. So let's begin. And the first one is delivered by Gustav Nilsonne. He is from, I will check to be sure. He's associate professor of neuroscience at Karolinska Institutet and coordinator of data domain specialist with Swedish National Data Service. Gustav is involved in numerous activity initiatives of open science and data sharing, including as co-chair of IOSC Association Task Force on Research Carriers Recognition and Credit. And his presentation is Data Domain Specialists and Flagship Projects, Challenges and Successes in Crafting Partner Contributions to the Swedish National Data Service Consortium. Follow yours.
Thank you very much, Vaidas, for this introduction. I'm going to bring up the slides. When I was little, I used to play the trumpet in a brass band. Ever since then, I thought that if there are more people in the audience than on stage, it's a great success. This principle has been very useful to me in scientific conferences, and I'm glad to see so many here in this afternoon session. So I will start by describing the Swedish National Data Service, what we are and what we do. Perhaps someone here is curious about what's going on halfway across town where the S&D offices are. And then I'm going to talk about the partner contributions to the S&D consortium. So the Swedish National Data Service is a national infrastructure for making research data accessible to Swedish researchers as well as researchers in other countries. It is governed by a consortium of 9 universities, and the University of Gothenburg is the host university. A further 23 higher education institutions and other organizations are members of the S&D network, a broader set of organizations that have a kind of affiliation. These are the 9 universities, and this includes, you might say, the what one might describe as the old and large universities in Sweden that all stand behind the S&D consortium. The network includes practically every higher education institution and additionally a number of other organizations that have a role in performing research in Sweden. S&D offers, first of all, support for open access to research data by training, assistance, and technical solutions. I would say, although I'm a bit partial, that S&D has in the last years become really the focal point for knowledge building and capacity building in research data sharing in Sweden, and provides training to the research support offices and organizations in the various universities in the country. S&D also offers a comprehensive system for making research data fair, including a web-based research data catalog, where researchers can upload their data with detailed metadata, and secondary users can download the data either by direct download or by request in case the data cannot be shared directly, for example, if they contain sensitive personal information. The Swedish government has mandated that the higher education sector will make a transition into an open science system by 2026. This has been mandated to every higher education institution, and also in particular to 2 governmental agencies, the National or Royal Library of Sweden, which has a particular task to coordinate open access publications, and the Swedish Research Council, which coordinates open data. The Swedish National Data Service is funded primarily by the Swedish Research Council, as well as by its consortium partners, and is the main infrastructure that is, in a sense, tasked with being the, if nothing else, the fallback means by which researchers can make this happen. The Swedish National Data Service has been around for a very long time, for several decades. It started out as a social science data repository, but a few years ago it moved into the current model of becoming a national consortium with all these universities standing behind it. And at that point, the universities decided to make a co-founding agreement in order to meet the funding from the Swedish National Research Council. And the co-funding has taken place primarily by providing data domain specialists. These have been appointed from 2017 and onwards, and I was myself the first data domain specialist who was appointed in 2017 for medical data from the Karolinska Institute. This role was thought of as it was going to be researchers with a strong domain-specific expertise, as well as expertise in data management and sharing. So people who stand in the actual practice of research with good connections to their peers in the field and who are able to drive change. So to try to find international comparisons, you might say that this role partly overlaps with the concept of an open data champion, but also partly with the concept of a data steward. It's not intended to be people who actively support researchers by curating data, but by providing expertise. And so the tasks include things like outreach, support, education and training, and policy work. These are the domain specialists today, myself and my colleagues. Every university got to pick a thematic area for domain expertise, and it turned out like this. I'm not going to read all of this, but what you can see is that we spontaneously got two main clusters, you might say, one around registry data, medical data, sensitive data, and another around environmental and climate data. This has been useful in my opinion because it has enabled a closer collaboration between the domain specialists that have overlapping expertise and has allowed us to go deeper into tackling some field-specific challenges. At the same time, it means that many areas are undercovered, in particular natural sciences and technology and humanities to some extent. There have been challenges, and this stems largely from the following problem. The universities have provided co-funding, but they have at the same time, as a point of principle, determined that they themselves need to control the actual flow of funding and the governance of where the money goes and what happens with it in their own respective organization. This means that the S&D is supposed to make use of this resource, but does not have direct access to whoever is the boss, simply put, at the respective university where the domain specialists work. It took a while for us to figure out exactly what the domain specialists were going to do. There was an evaluation partway in which showed that there were many different ideas going around about what the roles were. And it was also quite difficult to find out what everyone was doing back in their home organization. Often the participating universities also did not know. We got questions about what the domain specialists were doing that were a bit difficult to answer. I mean, from the universities themselves where the respective domain specialist was working. We tried to tackle this by appointing a coordinator, that's me, and by introducing a yearly work plan with specific aims that we were able to follow up. And this, I will say, has at least contributed to a much increased transparency about what work is being conducted. Nevertheless, we thought that it was time to refine the model. And therefore, we have now introduced something we call the S&D flagships. This is a project-based way of working. Instead of appointing a person, we define a project which is proposed by the member universities and into which they put their co-funding contribution. The projects are thematic and have a specified time frame, specified milestones and deliverables, and so on. And collaboration between consortium partners is encouraged. Very importantly, we want these projects to have tangible benefits that can be disseminated and transferred to other universities, primarily within the consortium, but also, of course, outside of these. And the first pilot flagships, you will have to excuse the mixed metaphor, have started this year. We have one which is a collaboration between the Royal Technical University in Stockholm and Chalmers University of Technology here in Gothenburg, which is on automated workflows for integration of research information systems. For example, this means making data management plans machine readable so that when researchers deposit data in the S&D catalog, metadata can be harvested already from the data management plan in order to reduce the burden for researchers to enter the same information into different systems several times. Lund University is running the other one. It's on living databases in social sciences and humanities. So they're trying to catch the in-between state. If you imagine a continuum where we have on one end research data sets that are generated once and then they are finished and nothing more happens with them. They can be archived in a repository as a finished product. And at the other end, a registry which continues to update with data on a regular basis and which is held by a registry keeper who is responsible for the management and preservation. In between, there are databases which are perhaps updated from time to time. They are in some sense dynamic, but they are not really a registry. And that's what this flagship project is trying to address, to build a method for increasing the sustainability and sharing the opportunities for sharing such data. So what have we learned? Well, we have found a need to navigate university management models which are sometimes a bit Byzantine, and where it is sometimes not clear to the universities themselves who is responsible for what they are contributing, even though they have a desire to find out from us what the contribution is. We have found that clear goals and follow-up improves the transparency and to some extent also the delivery. However, we are still not fully satisfied with the domain specialist role as it is today. And so far, it seems that the project format, the flagship projects, allows better alignment towards specific goals, and it also enables us to build joint governance structures where we have steering groups composed of representatives both from each university and from the Swedish National Data Service office, which makes it much easier to align on mutual objectives. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Gustav. Now the time for questions. Are there any questions in the audience or on the chat? Yeah.
You mentioned about the Swedish government mandate for 2026 in open science. Could you talk a little bit more about exactly what does that mean, like in terms of, you know, is there a percentage or is it, you know, kind of clear cut exactly what that means and what the consequence might be if that's not met?
Certainly. So the mandate is for research publications to be fully open access, and this actually was supposed to have occurred already last year, as well as for research data to be fully open access according to the well-known principle, as open as possible, as close as necessary. So really the mandate is to make all the data available that can be made available. And similar to the open access mandate, I don't think we're going to reach 100% by the year 2026. And no one will be punished, I expect, for not meeting the target. Rather, it's a strong signal, I think, to the sector to try to develop methods to improve the incentives and the infrastructures and everything that we need to facilitate data sharing.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much, and congratulations to Sweden to have such an ambitious goal. It's really, really great to hear. It's very interesting that you talk about these domain-specific specialists. And we have a very similar struggle, so to say, in Germany right now. We have the National Research Data Infrastructure, and we founded consortia, one for each discipline, but we also realized that we don't have to do everything for each discipline. We can share our work, like basic work, like access to training, certain tools, etc. Do you collaborate in that way? And if you do, we find it really hard to bring the disciplines together, and it's sometimes even hard to talk between the disciplines. Maybe you can share your experience in that. Thank you.
That's a great question. And I agree that the challenges are mostly not discipline specific, but they can be perhaps, I mean, in my own mind, I think of them more as specific to the data type. And in particular, data from humans that are potentially sensitive are a very big source of consternation, and where we are trying very hard to figure out principles that work for everyone and that all the lawyers can agree on between the different organizations that are involved. It's very interesting to hear about your experiences in Germany as well. I don't think we've had such, let's say, siloing, perhaps as you describe here, perhaps because we've not built so much around disciplines, or perhaps because we haven't built as much, period. I'm not certain, could be. Well, basically I agree with what I think is your suggestion that we'd be better off not looking inwards in each discipline, but rather trying to learn from each other.
Anybody else? I don't see any more questions. So thank you, Gustav, once again for your presentation.
Thank you.
And I would like to invite our next presenter, Tatiana Kvetnaya. And Tatiana is studied psychology at the University of Tübingen and Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main, Germany, as a research assistant at the Leibniz Institute for Psychology. She's involved in establishing a national research data infrastructure for social sciences, CESSDA. As part of her doctoral thesis, Tatiana is developing training methods for teaching of data management skills and data literacy to behavioral and social sciences. So please present your presentation, which is called RDM Compass, an online platform to foster data management skills for data curators in the social sciences.
All right. Thank you for this introduction and welcome. Thanks for joining me in this presentation on RDM Compass. First, I will provide some institutional context, which was also briefly mentioned before, in which we operate, and then introduce the project itself to you and the challenges that we tackle and the kinds of goals that we want to achieve with it and how we are going about it. So being here after almost 2 conference days at least, or for some 3 conference days, we were probably made aware that there is kind of a skills gap in terms of research data management skills. The demand for research data management skills and research data literacy is rising, and that is especially relevant for research data centers or RDCs, which play a crucial role in curating, archiving, and providing access to research data. But many applicants for positions in research data centers are lacking RDC-specific competencies. For example, in a survey that was conducted amongst research data centers in Germany, it was revealed that this skills gap is particularly relevant in terms of the ethical and legal aspects of RDM and data documentation skills like anonymization, sensitive data, data protection laws, and data security, which might be understandable given the fact that most people come into these roles not being formally trained as a data curator, because there is no formal training like that as of now. And that is where consort SWD, I might say consort SPD throughout the presentation in German, just because I'm used to it. This is where consort SWD comes in. This is short for the Consortium for Social, Behavioral, Educational, and Economic Sciences. And these RDM skills topic is really just one of several topics that consort SWD currently addresses. But the main goal of it, being part of the national research data infrastructure, is to support the research data management needs of its communities, these discipline-specific ones that are mentioned on here. And the strategy is to provide researchers and RDCs with the tools and services that they need for managing and sharing data in a fair way. And to zoom in a little bit further, an important part of the strategy is also, in addition to all other aspects like data access and technical solutions itself, is developing and exchanging RDM skills between research data centers. And this is what our team between the Leibniz Institute for Psychology and GESIS is mainly concerned with. And our project measure itself consists of 4 milestones, which are developing an online training platform, which I'm going to talk in a minute more specifically, but also developing a training program for RDC staff itself, and also a certification course for, on research data management for staff, but also online training for students and early career researchers. So basically people who might want to become a data curator in the future. But as I already mentioned, this is the one we're going to be focusing on today. So let's dive in. So the RDM Compass, that is short for Research Data Management Competence Base, is the online training and information platform to foster RDM skills that we are developing, that is really supposed to be kind of the groundwork for these upcoming milestones that I just introduced. And it's geared specifically towards data curators or data managers and RDC staff. And as I mentioned, also those who would want to become one in the future in the social sciences. And if you go to this project website, you will not find very much right now because it is currently in development, and the first version of it is supposed to launch in January 23. And while it will be focused on Germany in terms of content, it will be also available in English. So these will be, or these are the main building blocks of the RDM Compass platform itself. And at the heart of this will be the training section, which is a catalog of hands-on courses that participants will be able to freely participate in, and that will be focused on building the data competencies, the data management competencies that they need. And the knowledge base section will provide essential, kind of in a brief way, generic and discipline-specific research data management information in addition to the training section. Also, the RDC support section will provide even more concrete guidelines for specific measures people might want to implement right at their RDCs, like remote access for sensitive data, or getting a certification or accreditation for their research data center. So as you can see, these building blocks cover quite a spectrum from relatively theoretical to very practical aspects of research data management, but also for the entire platform, users can engage with the parts of the platform by providing feedback or submitting training materials themselves. So in the next part, I want to introduce you a little bit more to our platform, more closely guided by these kinds of challenges that we intend to tackle during the development process, or more specifically, goals that we want to reach. And I will illustrate each one and then elaborate on the kinds of solutions we envision and try to implement in the process. So the first challenge or goal is how to involve our target group, the data curators and research data centers, in our work and to collaborate with them. So we recognize that a lot of expertise is in the research data centers already. And what we want to do is tap on that expertise and make it available for other research data centers too, and create courses based on the material that RDCs already have and where they have expertise in. And therefore, how the content for the training center will be acquired is that we will reach out to RDCs to send us their training materials and submit it to us directly, which we preliminarily have done already and continue to do. We wrote submission guidelines to facilitate the process. And there will be requirements as to the length and the topic that the materials will have to cover, but the main goal will be to make the submission process as easy as possible for the RDCs, really, to encourage the submissions. And for that, our project team will handle the ingesting process after materials are submitted into the learning management system. And also it will be possible to do that anytime after the project site launches. But also the course material submission is one way to engage and collaborate with the platform. And besides, another way to do that is also to not only submission of materials, but also editing of knowledge base articles, which you could do. These are some mock-ups of the platform that we've created, which you could be doing through dialogues like this, for example, or like this. For example, we are in contact with the German Network of Educational Research Data, for example, to create some discipline-specific content in the context of educational sciences. And generally, we are trying to build the site in a way that encourages feedback on content itself too, for example, with buttons like, was this page helpful, which is in German here, but you can probably, you could imagine that as a widget where you could put a thumbs up or a thumbs down, for example. So the next question that arises from that is, what kind of content will it be exactly, and how will it be structured on the website? What kind of structure specifically to choose to make the learning experience for the learners on there meaningful and also contextual? And to answer this question based on the literature research, we chose two concepts to guide the structure in which we want to structure the training and the content of the training also in. And the first one is the data curation lifecycle as a basis. I will get to that in a minute. And other data services, for example, or in other contexts, follow a lifecycle based on a researcher's perspective. But choosing this lifecycle, the data curation lifecycle model specifically, will be more tailored to the data curator's perspective. And the second one that we chose in terms of the the content of the courses will be the data competency framework that was developed for the German Forum for Higher Education in the Digital Age. And it encompasses multiple facets of data literacy that also emerge as important in other learning theories as well, like theoretical aspects of knowledge, practical skills, and also attitudes and motivation in regards to the specific content. So you might have seen this data curation lifecycle by the DCC and Sarah Higgins already. And what we did was use that as a blueprint and stylize it a little bit and reduce it visually to its most important components to look at more clear and appealing for beginner audiences as well. And the DCC lifecycle covers essential steps from acquisition and selection of data to reuse and archiving, and therefore maps all these workflows that we think are relevant for research data managers, and therefore we can kind of structurally guide our website. And here you can see how that might look like. So these, again, are mockups that we created for the website to look like this. And this will be a possible way in which learners can browse it by lifecycle aspect. They could, for example, see this, and if they are interested in one specific lifecycle component, they could click on one or click on the lifecycle itself, and then read a little bit more about each component. And then once they arrived at a component that they're interested in, they will see all available courses that might be there for this component. And this is the part where they would have to log into the learning management system, which will be Moodle. And then we'll be able to take courses that also allow for features like progress tracking and viewing the courses that were already done by them and being able to display their progress also to external institutions maybe. And the knowledge base will, of course, also mirror this kind of structure. So onto the third challenge that I want to address. How do we create RDM Compass to meet the criteria for fair data or fair training material data itself? So to increase findability, we adapted metadata scheme specifically developed for training materials, which will also increase interoperability with other platforms that might offer or collect training materials. And it will be open source, based on open source software, and accessible to anyone who really is willing to register with their email. The knowledge base, as I said, will be just freely available without a login, and the trainings will be available for everyone who just signs up with their email for free. And since we use Moodle as a learning management system, this content is potentially exportable to other learning management systems because Moodle allows for that. And the materials we will offer and also later create ourselves may be reused and adapted as we share them under suitable license. So to wrap it all up, what is the current state of the project? The technical development of the website and the training platform is mostly finalized at this point. And at that time, we continue to development and finalize the content production. I'm being in the last stages of writing the knowledge base right now and acquiring training material to start out with to offer in our first version. And to achieve that, we have been reaching out to research data centers in our network and got in touch with our research communities. And this is an ongoing task we're actively working on right now, and are also, in terms of our future work, figuring out what the best strategies might be for that in the future. So that might be something, if you would like to discuss with us, that would be nice. And also with the training material that we preliminarily acquired, we are working on creating a suitable ingestion workflow for these training materials to use later for the final launch. And we plan to have this done by the end of the year. And like I said, hopefully this will be managed. So the final version will launch in January 23. So after the platform will be launched, what is the future perspective, or how will things continue? So like I mentioned in the beginning, this is supposed to really lay the groundwork for integration of possible future training materials that we will create in the upcoming months and years of the project, but also not only for them, but also potentially for your training materials. So if you have seen, if you have looked at this and could potentially imagine the training material that you have developed to also appear in a site like this, then this is also definitely possible and built for it. And in that case, feel free to get in touch with us. We would be glad to do that. And the final goal is basically to establish our platform as the central training material hub in a way for the social sciences, and hopefully with this, by also continuing to collaborate with other groups that are sharing the same goal, as to kind of create synergies and join our efforts. We hope to contribute to sustainable skill development and hopefully improve data access for the research communities we are trying to serve. And if you could have question or feedback, don't hesitate to get in touch with me or any of my colleagues that are displayed here, whom I also would like to thank a lot for their work, and who also all contribute to this project. And you will find us at the conference either in person or remotely. And until then, I thank you for your attention and look forward to your questions and feedback.
Thank you, Tatiana. This is an impressive database gonna be. I hope there are questions from the audience. Okay, I see 2 hands.
Hi, Tatiana. Yes, impressive indeed. Thank you. I'm interested, as we have talked about informally, also in clearly, I know the main audience is Germany and national infrastructure, but as you're producing the materials, German and English, obviously you're appealing or eventually have an international audience. So is there anything in the current project that can expand scope to an international scale, or do you see that as anything possible for the future?
Well, I would say that from my perspective, our current focus on the German speaking audience and the German speaking discipline is due to the fact that right now we are trying to exchange this knowledge specifically between research data centers that are located in Germany. So this will be the main goal, and also this is the main goal of the NFDI, the National Research Data Infrastructure effort that was already mentioned. But we are aware that this kind of content is not only relevant for Germany, it might be when it comes to data protection law specifically, for example. So not all international material might be applicable for Germany, but we are, I would say, trying to design this platform in a way that would also be scalable to other contexts, I'm sorry, and therefore would have the potential to be expandable in an international context. So yeah.
Okay, I've seen another hand raised. The same question. Okay. Anybody else?
I'll just suggest that there's probably already people in this room so I'm involved in an Australian project, and some of the online colleagues there, which is literally around building a training library for the social sciences and secure data access in Australia. So I think there's probably some conversations to be had there if there's an interest in building that up. I think there's probably initiatives already in place that might be worth coordinating on.
Yeah, thanks. I hope so, and I hope we will get in touch.
Any other questions? I have a question. In the beginning, you said that there will be some kind of applications of which courses will be in this system. Do you have any plan or criteria who will be selected and who will be not, or how this process will be?
Oh, so you mean the kinds of requirements for the courses that
Something
will
like
be on
that.
there? I think it will not be a review process that will be as competitive as you can imagine it to be for a conference or a journal or something, but more like checking whether the requirements to fit the platform are met in a way that the courses are or the material is not too brief, but maybe also not too long, that it covers parts of the data curation lifecycle, and that it is structured in a way that we can use in our ingesting process. Just some formal requirements, I'd say.
Thank you. Okay, one more question.
Thanks. Hi, I just wanted to ask about the metadata that you're using to actually describe the training resources in the catalogue. I'm working on a couple of European Open Science Cloud projects, which has been mentioned a few times, where we're looking at a federated approach. So we don't just have one catalogue, and we can federate resources if we are using this sort of similar metadata format. So have you considered that? Or at the moment, we're looking at the Research Data Alliance minimum metadata recommendations.
Mm-hmm. So I believe that the metadata scheme that we are using, a new version of that has been published last year, I think, where it was also partially, it also included the minimal data set, the minimal metadata guidelines or recommendations in it itself that you have mentioned. So we do try to make it as interoperable as possible by also keeping us updated on what the most current metadata scheme is. So and this metadata scheme that I cited, it was published in German. So if I'm happy to reference it to you more specifically after the presentation. I can look it up, but we keep it in mind. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can move on. And since I don't see Roxanne connected, so we will proceed with Darren's presentation. So I would like to invite Darren Bell. He is Director of Technical Services at the UK Data Archive based at the University of Essex. He has been at the archive since 2011, and prior to that worked in the private sector for global marine systems as network infrastructure engineer and later as data modeler. He currently works on a number of CESSDA products, including IASSIST and Ddi Profiles, as well as being an active member of the Ddi community, sitting on the scientific board and the technical committee. Yeah. And most importantly, he is a semantic web evangelist, believing that RDF more accurately reflects our Lord's intended design for creation.
Where's the forward slash? I give up.
Forward slash is here, I guess.
Is that backwards? That's a backward one. Does anyone know where the / is on a Swedish keyboard?
Seven.
Oh, okay. Right, shift 7. Okay. You learn something new every day.
So the floor is yours. I
Okay,
hope
yeah.
you will be able to access your presentation.
Just let me down. Sorry, bear with me. I was a little bit disorganized in getting this slide up to the presentation screen. And it's all in Swedish. Can you just download this for me? Sorry.
And this is
Yeah, that's the one. That's great.
I've opened it.
Okay. Is it already being shared?
Yeah, you just have to enlarge whatever. Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
Oh,
No. You just have to go to your slides. Yeah. And
right,
now
F5.
F5,
Yeah.
and that's it. Don't do
Right, okay.
anything. You can.
Yeah, I should start by saying I'm Director of Technical Services. But yes, PowerPoint still defeats me, I'm afraid. Okay, yes, so I am aware that this is the last session of the day, so I'll try not too hard to keep you in between the banquets. Okay. I'm not on Zoom. You lied, you told me I was on Zoom. No, just share the full screen, otherwise it's a nightmare. No, to the full screen. Just this one.
I don't think it comes through so well.
Outside that. F5. Doesn't work.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Have we got it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and we're sharing that on Zoom as well. Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah. So I'm Darren Bell from the UK Data Archive, part of the UK Data Service. And for the last couple of years, I've been involved with CESSDA, doing things around Ddi Profiles, CESSDA Metadata Model.
Sorry, I think you will not be able to change the slides because we see only. So you were right, we have to share the whole screen. How can we stop share? This.
Right. I think 7th time lucky. Right, I can't share the slides. This is ridiculous. I can't move the slides. Right, okay, now I can. Right, I'll start again. Okay, yep, I'm Darren Bell. I work at the UK Data Archive and I've worked on CESSDA for a couple of years on the CESSDA metadata model, as well as a few other things. This presentation really is about how you start with a bunch of 20 or so service providers across Europe and build and synthesize some products that bring in their metadata. There are lots of useful resources all over the place in different repositories, some larger than others. some with different levels of expertise. So how do you go about aggregating all of that stuff into a useful and interoperable, we have to use the FAIR acronym as quickly as possible, into FAIR systems. Okay, so just a little bit about CESSDA, if you don't already know, okay, it's 22 service providers that all agree to share knowledge, exchange, work on products. It started in 1976 and became a European research infrastructure in 2017. So although there are 22 members, there are a number of other smaller partners as well. And I believe Force in Switzerland have observer status at the moment. So it is quite a big club of like-minded people. So the main product for CESSDA is the CESSDA data catalog, one-stop shop, which is a phrase we often kind of wheel out for these kind of aggregated products, but it is essentially true. What we try and do is make sure that all of these different resources that otherwise might remain hidden with different service providers are made available, not just across Europe, internationally. You can get to the CESSDA data catalog and look for study level metadata, so you have a much wider canvas on which to perform searches and start to do research. So at the moment, there's over 40,000 records on there that's covering 20 European countries. Lots of different types of data, whether that's microdata, quali, mixed methods, and the access data will give you a lead in then to how you can actually follow up and access that data, whether it's open or controlled or secure. So yeah, the obligatory screenshot of the CESSDA data catalog. I encourage you to go and have a look and see what you can find there, okay, because it does aggregate metadata from 22 different countries, okay. So that's all great with the catalogue. We have some supporting products as well. We have ELST, the multilingual thesaurus, which currently contains 14 languages, I think, at the moment, and we'll be getting Icelandic and Hungarian in there soon. We have the CESSDA vocabulary service, which, as you might have guessed, stores and makes available controlled vocabularies, and also the CESSDA European Question Bank, which is at the moment, and I think something's going on at this conference around this, is going to be hosted in Collectica, and we'll be harvesting questions from other service providers as well. So that's a brief rundown of the most important CESSDA products. Okay, so that's all great, but how do we actually make any of that happen? You know, where do you start with all of this kind of stuff? Service providers, as you would expect, as anyone would do in a distributed, federated organization, often do things in slightly different ways. So they might have different local usages. What we call a study number at the UK Data Archive may not mean quite the same thing in Sweden or in Poland. So, you know, there's a job of work to do there to make sure that everyone is talking the same language and using common references. People have their own control vocabularies. You know, how can we make sure that those things get aligned? People have different levels of access control. What we call open or safeguarded might not mean very much to someone in a different country who might call it something else, or might have completely different research or application processes for data. And different people are at different stages of the DDI maturity journey. Some people, well, I would say still the majority of people use Codebook, whereas others are kind of more advanced down the road and are using Lifecycle. And again, they might distribute their data in completely different ways. Some people might use Nestar, other people might use an OAI server, other people might have APIs, others may not. Okay, so the problem statement, because every project should start with a problem statement, because if you don't have one, you shouldn't be doing the project. We want to ingest valid and well-formed metadata from multiple service providers into aggregated products. We need a simple, stable tool chain to achieve this. And as well as having a tool chain, you need to know what your metadata is and the descriptions of the different object. I'm saying artifacts here. I really want to say objects, but I'm aware that doesn't work for non-developers sometimes. So there are a number of things you need to establish from the outset as to how you're going to actually manage this and bring it all together. So in terms of a workflow, the way that the CESSDA data catalog actually works, I'm kind of rooted to the spot here. I really want to lunge across the stage. But essentially every
I can give you this microphone.
Oh, no, it's all right, don't worry. So I do need more exercise though. The service provider, okay, obviously will hold their metadata in a local store of some description. In order to make that metadata available, you have to transform it into some kind of exchange format. In the example here, that would be good old-fashioned DDI codebook. Okay, now once you've done that, then there's something called an OAI provider, which is a fancy kind of word for a server that just makes that data available on the internet. Now we have a little piece of software, say little piece, I don't mean to disparaging, it's a significant piece of software called the CESSDA Metadata Harvester, which will bring that metadata in, aggregate it all together locally at CESSDA, and then the CESSDA data catalog website will read that data and make it available on the website. So that's essentially how it works. Now, that's not the most complex infrastructure you'll ever see, but there are a lot of things you need to think about to make this work consistently and robustly. Okay, so I don't want to get too technical in this, but in a sense, it's hard to avoid some of this if you want to get into a little bit of the detail about how this works. Even if you don't end up really, you know, for the non-technical people, even if you don't really get your head around some of these things, it's a useful narrative to understand some of the problems of going from a non-technical starting point to a technical implementation of something like the catalog. So, you know, the journey in order to make all this happen is you start with Excel spreadsheets, you turn those into XML schema, you turn them into something slightly more complex and abstract called UML, and you implement all of this with something called Ddi Profiles, which I'll go into more detail about in the coming slides. Okay, so the first thing you have to do really is capture, you know, what metadata do we actually want to capture for the catalog? Now, there are different views on this, okay, but I think it's fair enough to say that DDI has a lot of elements in it. You know, DDI is a big product, and it can, I mean, personally, once you've been around the block a couple of times, it's not that hard. But it can be initially intimidating to people. So in terms of information capture, what are the things we want to put in the catalog? I mean, Excel is great for information gathering. Unfortunately, it's been abused over the years as a database, but it is great for information capture. Okay, so the first thing that happened within CESSDA Metadata Office is that we said, look, DDI has got about 800 elements or thereabout. You know, in truth, people only use, you know, a couple of hundred max of these 95% of the time. So we came up with the, sorry, I say we, Metadata Office came up with the idea of building something called the CESSDA Metadata Model, which would be a subset of DDI. So again, the most useful things that you could actually use in DDI. Now, that was all done in Excel. It's great, published on Zenodo. But the problem with Excel is it's great for information capture, but it's pretty useless for semantics, distributing data, making data available in structured ways over the web. So the next logical stage from that was to formalize that into an XML schema file. Now, I'm aware that some of you may not be familiar with XML schema, but essentially all you're doing is taking spreadsheet rows and putting them into a kind of machine readable format. And that helps make the data more interoperable, I suppose. And you can do nice things like automatically turning it into HTML style documentation. So this is kind of a visual fix on what that actually means. The CESSDA metadata model's in a big spreadsheet with about 600 rows. This particular row, you know, you'll recognize this is unit of analysis. We captured some basic information. It's a recommended element. In DDI3, that's where we'd want to stuff this element into. So what I did over a period of months, because this was kind of row by row by row, was convert this into an XML schema, which you can see below. You don't need to obsess about all the detail of that if you're not familiar with XML schema, but just to give you some impression of where you start and where you get to in terms of making this more machine actionable. Okay, so looking at, once I'd gone through all the 600 elements, then you've basically got a nice kind of structured graphical representation that you don't get from a spreadsheet. So you've got a nice hierarchy. You have kind of 11 or 12 top level categories, you know, study, organization. So it's all neat and logical, and it's machine readable because it's in an XML schema. Okay, so XML is great, but it's still XML and it's still a little bit restrictive. So can we take this another step now of abstraction and turn this into UML? Okay, the problem with our XML schema is we're never actually going to use it. It's kind of just a list of stuff in a machine readable format. So then we turn it into something called a UML model. Okay, now for those of you who are not familiar with UML models, don't worry about it. It's just boxes and arrows. You've got stuff. The stuff has labels that describe what that stuff is, and then you have arrows that connect the stuff to some other stuff. Okay, so that's UML modeling. You can get 1,200 a day for that. Okay, so that's what a UML model is, but it's another level of abstraction and sophistication. Okay, so again, I don't want to dive into too much detail about this, but UML model, we call this stuff classes in UML. And classes have attributes, which is a car is red, you know, that's the color attribute of the car, those kinds of things. The great thing about UML is once you've done it, you can then exchange it with other kind of modeling systems. So yeah, it's kind of bringing it along to another level of sophistication. And it so happens in DDI, there is a system called COGS, which enables you to take UML models and turn it into pretty web-based documentation. Okay. So DDI profiles, so where do they all fit into this? Okay, so far we've defined a list of stuff that we want to use that we think is useful. That's all the things that we potentially could use for the CESSDA data catalog. But that only takes you so far, because what you now need to know is for a particular scenario, let's say I want to bring my metadata into the CESSDA data catalog, or it might be the European Question Bank. What are the things that I need to tell the service provider that they must provide, and the things that they could provide if they wanted extra brownie points? Okay. So with DDI profiles, this is something that's been around for 10 years, but has never been really fully leveraged. What you can do is effectively write a document that says, in a very nicely structured way, these are the things I need to get from you, service provider X and service provider Y. If you do this properly, you'll get a nice tick, we'll take it in, everything's clean, we have clean metadata, a good catalog, and everybody is really happy. Okay, so an XML schema that we talked about before, that defines everything you could use. A DDI profile very loosely defines the things that you really do need to use, that you must use in order to provide the necessary metadata. So you can also put things like recommended and optional in a DDI profile, which is not possible in an XML schema. Some people think it's actually not a good idea to have recommended or optional anyway, but that's another debate. Okay, so we now have these things called profiles. What we can do now is actually build some tooling. So a service provider can say, here's my metadata. And we build a tool called the CESSDA Metadata Validator, which says, okay, I'm now going to check your metadata against this profile, and I'm going to tell you whether it passes or fails. And that way we put some proper quality checks then in for all the data that's coming into the CESSDA data catalog. Okay, so very briefly, again, don't obsess about the detail if you're not familiar with XML, but it's very structured. A DDI profile will have a version, a title. It tells you here that this is for DDI 2.5 documents, and other information about the types of things that you can use. Generally, these documents will be several thousand lines long. Okay. And again, just a bit more information about that. So yeah, whether it's mandatory, recommended, all of those kinds of things. Okay, so I was going to do a demo, but to be honest, I didn't want to risk it, and I didn't want to keep people from the banquet. I didn't realize I was going third, so I could have done a demo, but no, you'll never know, you see. Okay, so regarding the next steps for the CESSDA data catalog, that's in the EOSC marketplace now. We are constantly reviewing the profiles, and at the moment I'm working on the next iteration of the CESSDA data catalog and European question bank profiles. In fact, I should be working on them at the moment rather than doing this presentation, but we'll also be doing them for DDI 2.6 and DDI 3.3 by the end of the year. I believe that 2.6 is going out into public review imminently and should be out in the autumn. Okay, so I mean the whole idea of this is to provide practical support to avoid the garbage in, garbage out situation. I think, you know, we've seen many aggregator catalogs or content aggregators that end up just being buckets. And I think the idea of this entire ecosystem of CESSDA metadata model, DDI profiles and XML schema is strict, even if you don't necessarily understand all of the tech, is essentially the nuts and bolts that we need to make metadata more reliable and more robust. Now, with the CESSDA metadata harvester, we're pulling in metadata from European service providers. In principle, there's no reason why we couldn't actually pull that in from anywhere in the world, providing that other service providers comply with the profiles. And as well as the stuff coming in, it can now be fanned out. So we will be publishing out to open air after the next iteration of the profiles, which should be at the end of this month or very early July. Okay. So, and CESSDA training and CESSDA metadata office also will be, you know, promoting use of the CESSDA metadata validator, particularly, well, I hope so anyway, because that is quite a generic tool that can be used to validate any DDI profile and not just the CESSDA stuff as well. Okay. So just a couple of lessons learned throughout this process. Different stakeholders speak different languages. Never, ever, ever, we were talking about this yesterday, don't let developers drive the design of the product, okay? Equally, you shouldn't really let users completely drive the design of the product. I think that's been a learning curve for us, and we're actively talking in Metadata Office at the moment, how do we improve that virtuous cycle of bidirectional communication. So a user says, I want this, and the developer goes, no, you can't have that. And then you might have an intermediary that says, well, hang on, you could have this, but you might have to lose that piece of functionality. So we are learning about improving that whole process. My number one thing, as Carsten will know, is have a design authority. Don't try and do this stuff by committee, for the love of God, okay? I know we all try and operate by consensus, and we're not all nice, affable, sharing academics, but you know, you do need a bit of command and control for this, and you do need a person to say, that's a terrible idea, we're not doing that, or yes, we're going to do that instead. So I'd say, I mean, really, as part of any software or product development lifecycle, you should have a design authority anyway. But I'm saying, having been burnt by this over the last year or two, I can only do my bit and try and really urge you to make sure that you think about that in the next product development project. Okay. DDI profiles themselves were originally done by Akim Vakarov, I think, in DDI lifecycle. Having been through this process, there are a number of other things we'd like to see in there. So I'll take that to the technical committee. I don't know when 3.4 is intended to be out, but it would be nice to see some of the slight bodgers we've had to do in the profiles incorporated into the next version of DDI lifecycle. So yeah, and review and publish the process. It's one thing to discuss this thing over Zooms and, you know, shooting the breeze over emails and everything, but, you know, we use Bitbucket for every issue now, and it can be tedious saying, can I close this? Do you agree with this? But you need that audit trail to see which decisions were made and when. Okay, so just finally, I mean, obviously we'll publish the slides, but the DDI profiles are available from that page. The CESSDA metadata model is available as a spreadsheet, an XML schema, a UML model, which is a bit clunky at the moment, but it'll improve in the next iteration. And the CESSDA metadata validator, CMV CESSDA EU. Okay, so yep, thank you for listening. And if you do have any questions about any of this stuff, email metadataoffice@CESSDA EU. I'm going to take my life in my hands now and say, yeah, do email me, because sadly I found this stuff quite interesting. So if you email me, I will respond. Okay, all right, thank you, everyone.
Since we don't have another presentation, could you please show that what you intended to show and didn't?
Oh, this says the metadata validator. Yes, I can. Shall I use Chrome or shall I use Edge? Do I feel lucky? All right. Right. Okay, I can't actually find Chrome. I'm not using Edge. I refuse. So yeah, it's CMV. I'm bringing my own keyboard next time. It works. Okay. So this is the CESSDA metadata validator. Now, there is an API for this as well, isn't there, Carsten? Yeah, okay. But I mean, if let's say you have a DDI XML document, and you say, I would like to check this XML document and make sure that it is acceptable to CESSDA for ingest into their system. Okay, in the old days, you just fired it off and you might hear something a few months later from someone like John Shepherdson saying, did you realize you're not doing this properly? Okay, you can actually check this stuff now. You can do it one at a time through this interactive system, or there is an API if you're minded to do lots of them in sequence at the same time. But just to show you what we mean, we have something called a validation gate. I'm not going to get too much into that. Just let's assume it's basic. The idea is it's a bit like, are you going to get gold validation or platinum validation, depending on how many boxes you tick? Okay, but let's just stick with basic. So the profile, here you will have a list of available profiles. Okay, so you can see here that depending whether you're using DDI 1.2, which would be Nestar stuff, or Codebook or Lifecycle, and depending whether it was for European Question Bank or CESSDA Data Catalog, you would pick one of these. Let's go with the most common one, which is CESSDA Data Catalog and Codebook, because over 2/3 of service providers are still using Codebook for this purpose. Now, in terms of choosing a file, I don't actually have a file available there, but I can get some sample ones in the system to show you what's going on. Here's some we did earlier. So we have UKDS 2000. Now, Libby, I know this is the Edwardians collection, which is, I've been in the archive for too long if I know that stuff. And 7724 was that. Okay. So if I just clear that. So yeah, we had a couple from IASSIST as well. So yeah, let's go with 2000. So normally you would upload this from your desktop. So basically you've got an XML file there that you want to test and validate. And you've said, I want to test that this is a codebook thing that I want to test, that it's fit for purpose for CESSDA Data Catalog. So I'm going to click validate here, and I have no idea what's going to happen now because I don't know if this is clean or not. Okay, that's great, actually, because that's what I wanted to happen, because this will tell you now where things are actually missing. So, you know, as a report, it will tell you which bits are missing from your XML document. Now, unfortunately, there's no way to automatically fix this for you. It's up to you now to go away and sort this out. But it means that you can intercept these things at the source rather than, you know, hoying all of this into the CESSDA Data Catalog and letting the chaos ensue. So most of these are actually relatively straightforward. They're just XML lang attributes, which we, a couple of years ago, I think we decided that for multilingual profiles, we were going to have XML lang attributes. So actually, if I use the monolingual profile, you might see that that's no longer going to be an issue. So if I change the profile to 2.5 monolingual, and this is going to assume that you're just working in English or Finnish or a single language. And then if I actually select the same one, if everything is working in a predictable and nicely deterministic way, I should have a big green tick and I have no constraint violations. Okay, so that essentially is how the CESSDA metadata validator works. Now, for most real life purposes, you want to analyze your entire collection. So there is an API there, which is documented. There's a guy called Alexander Milbauer at IASSIST who's really, really good with documentation, which developers aren't always so good. So yeah, so as I said, this is more for kind of software people, but you can call all of this stuff, and you could write a little piece of code that would loop around your collection and check everything. Yeah. Okay.
Thank
You
you.
want to say something, Carsten?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually doing this. So every night, well, not, yeah, also every night. Every night when we harvest from all the service providers, we're actually running this through the loop, and we have dashboards that show us the status and which service provider has what level of compliance. And then we can generate reports to send to the service provider so that they know what to fix. But what we've seen is that in most cases, or in many cases, this goes from zero compliance, where every single document is failing with the exact same error, to 100% compliance because it was one error consistently in the software or somewhere that was then fixed across the entire archive. That's not always true. We have one archive which went from 80% compliance to 99.5% compliance because there was a technical problem in a part of the archive, and now there's 100 files left out of more than 6,000. And if you do some digging, you can figure out which archive that is. And the people started laughing. And those are then old data sets where it's not surprising that a file from the 70s, well, there's one thing that we nowadays consider mandatory missing. Yeah. And for that, it's then also helpful that we give you this report that says, well, you don't have to look manually at all 6,000 records here. You can just look at those. The other thing is, one thing we noticed is the validator does not check whether you're actually providing valid codebook. So there is no schema validation built into the validator. We're doing it manually. Well, I mean, I say manually. The validation pipeline that we run is now doing that also, because we noticed that that's not true for every well-established, even for well-established software like Dataverse. Not all versions produce proper codebook. And then things fail down the line and everyone said, what's going on? And yeah, interesting lesson.
Yeah. So yeah, so I mean, by all means, take a look at this tool. I think it has got a lot of potential because, I say, it is generic. This isn't CESSDA specific, and any DDI profile can be used to evaluate any DDI document. So I think, I mean, I'll certainly take that back to the technical committee, because I think this is a tool worth pushing forward, you know. Okay. All right, thank you, everyone.
So
yeah.
So I think that wraps up our session. We still have some 10 minutes before poster session. And I thank you, the audience and the presenters. And I wish you very nice banquet in the evening. Thank you all.